Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here at Sunnyside this morning. It's not quite sunny today, but we'll take a little gray fall day. But today's Conifer Day, essential evergreens. I like to call it colorful coniferous creatures, if you can say that 5 times fast. But thanks for joining us. We'll go through all kinds of evergreens. Nicole will be joining us in just a second, and we have a special guest, Mr. Smith, the Whistling Gardener, is here to answer some questions during class too. So make sure you're asking some really tough ones. That way I don't have to get them after class, right? So there's our sheet. Hopefully everybody got a copy of it. If you need a copy, let us know. It's on the website. It was emailed out with the class, so you can refer to that. There's Nicole. We can wave hi real quick.
Good morning.
There we go. It's a busy morning at Sunnyside. So we'll get into some conifers. Just a reminder, the classes are always recorded. All of you know me. I pick way too many plants. I got way too many pictures to show you. We're going to go fast and furious. We'll have plenty of time for questions. You can always go back, watch the class, and grab a name of something as well if you need to. So I thought we'd kind of start with, the basics. What is a conifer? If we think of conifer, we think of a needle. We got a needle on us. We're a tree common here in the Evergreen state, Washington, all kinds of different shapes, different sizes, you can name it. We got a lot of conifers to choose from. I thought it'd be kind of fun. I brought in one leaf off one of the ginkgos here on the property. You can see it's turning beautiful yellow for fall. That's dropping. This is a conifer. This is one that may not surprise some of you, but this is our prehistoric conifer. So the ginkgo goes back a couple 100 million years, and that is the bridge when we went from coniferous trees to broadleaf trees. So that is the one tree that looks totally different that does produce a cone. It's a conifer for reproduction, but this is one that we would classify as a conifer as well. So ginkgos are always fun for a little gold fall color. There's your history lesson for the day. Give you one little fact. So we can look at conifers as evergreens, but that's not always true. The vast majority of conifers are going to be evergreen. They keep their needles, but we're also going to have some deciduous ones. Larches, ginkgo, we just showed you. There's quite a few. Dawn redwood. We can go on and on. There are some deciduous conifers that turn beautiful color, drop their needles here in the winter, and then we re-leaf back out next spring again as well. If we look at conifers in the garden, as we go into fall here and heading into winter, perennials are going dormant. Trees are turning color, dropping their leaves. What are we left with in our landscape? It's a lot of the structure plants like conifers, evergreen shrubs, but this is the time of year I think the different types of evergreens are really going to shine. Yellows, blues, different textures, different shades of green, certainly different forms, different silhouettes in the garden. There's a lot to choose from when we get into the world of conifers for sure. I wanted to mention just one thing real quick because it's a good time of year as a lot of people come in the fall, winter, early spring to buy, larger plants like conifers to get into their landscape. A lot of plants are going to be field dug, where we're going to have a burlap sack that's tied with twine up around a root system and then around the trunk that we can take home, plant in our garden, and have a nicer tree long term. As we start to get into digging season, a lot of that stuff arrives here at Sunnyside. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knows, we never ever want to take that burlap off of the plant, pick the tree up, and then drop it in our hole. If we crack the root ball, especially on a conifer, it's going to crash pretty quickly. You'll usually about 4 or 5 months go by, and then you'll call and say, man, my tree is turning more brown by the day, and we lose it. So make sure we keep that sack intact, plant it in our hole, start to backfill. The last thing we do is cut it away from the trunk and either peel it to the sides, or for me, I'll usually grab my pruners or scissors and cut the excess burlap off on the top, throw my mulch over it, and then off we go. We got a happy transplant, okay? The other thing I would mention real quick too, because I'm sure there's going to be questions on what we would call flagging. Here in Washington, we had an incredibly warm year. We always have a dry summer anyway, but this year particularly dry and a little bit warmer than usual early summer. All evergreens are not evergreens forever, if that makes sense. The sturdiest conifers are going to hold their foliage for 3 years. That drops out late summer, early winter as the new growth that season replaced it. So you're always going to have some browning, down the center. You're going to have the pine needles dropping. There's nothing wrong necessarily with your tree as long as it's towards the inside, the older growth. This year, I bring that up because I would expect, me driving around my own yard, seeing different locations, there has been a lot more flagging than typical this year. So not necessarily disease, a bug, or an issue, just a natural process of nature, okay? So I'm going to start here, share my screen. Give me 1 second. We're going to get our slideshow going. We'll start whipping through some pictures here pretty quick. Well, there we go. Colorful conifers. I should have wrote creatures on there too, because I just like the ring of that. But there's May. We're going to go through quite a bit here. So if we look at, if we go back to kind of the essence of the conifer, we talked about maybe where they came from originally, but really in the whole world, when it comes down to it, we've got two main types of conifers, what I would call world conifers. You can spell not like our world, but WHORLD. That's our Christmas tree. If you think of that trunk that grows up with the concentric rings of branches, that's a world conifer. Our growth grows in whorls or sections on that plant. That's one type of tree. Think of your firs, your pines, your spruce. There's a lot of good examples of world type conifers. Random branch ones are going to be a little bit easier to prune. Our cypresses, junipers, all kinds of other options. Hemlock is a type of random branch. These are plants that we can probably prune a little bit easier than some others, and we can maybe keep them lower, bushier. We certainly got options for all these. But as you see different classifications come up here, keep in mind, this is going to dictate your pruning. It's a little bit harder to me to top a world type conifer or prune it back after a number of years. We really want to do this every season and control the growth slowly and steadily as we develop. Now, if we just looked at a couple tips here before we look at pictures, always pay attention to growth rates. That to me matters everything. This is one of those plants, probably as much as any in the nursery, you get what you pay for. And so if you come down and see, a little plant for $30 and you look across the aisle and there's one 4 foot tall for $30, that's all growth rate. That's not Sunnyside or me deciding to charge more one thing for another. It's just growth rate. How much time does it take for that plant to get to that size? So if you truly want small, miniature, dwarf plants, you're going to pay a little bit more, but you're not going to have the maintenance and the long-term pruning. So we've got a small spot, get a dwarf. Don't try to prune a large one and keep it down. You're going to end up losing at some point with the conifer type plants. Drainage is huge. There's not a lot of conifers that are going to take real wet, heavy clay soil. So if we can watch our drainage and make sure we've got the appropriate soil, again, we're going to have happy plants. Soil composition is a huge thing. All conifers love acidic soil. We're lucky here in Western Washington. I'd be shocked if you didn't have slightly acidic soil in your yard anywhere around here, but it's something that we always have. We usually have pretty rich, humusy soil. Yes, we have glacial till, I do too, and clay and other things, but we can amend with compost and solve some of those problems. As long as we're acidic, we're always going to be nice and happy with some of these evergreens. Always pay attention to sun and shade. There's some things that we're going to want to have in mostly shade, other things we want to have in hot sun. Certainly there's a balance between the two, but I would say more conifers do more with sun versus shade. We'd have to be a little more careful when we get into deep dark shade for sure. Now I mentioned the two types, the last one on there, fertilizing and care. And I mentioned the two types, whichever one you have. If we're going to fertilize, yes, I would always use a good organic product like Sure Start, or even the rhododendron food is an acidic type fertilizer that we can use at the time of planting. If we want to get this growing maybe a little faster or give it adequate food, we would feed once coming out of winter, maybe early March or so, and then one more time in early summer. That should be plenty to keep your evergreen happy. Maybe you're trying to block the neighbor behind you with a massive tree, so she doesn't look in, you don't look in her yard anymore. Yes, maybe we feed a third time midsummer if you really want to try to push some extra growth and get that plant bigger quicker. But once or twice a year should be plenty to keep these guys happy. Now, if we start looking through Some of our options
Yes, I
here,
think we're gonna have him answer that.
In the future, we need to.
your microphone's on, Nicole.
Evergreens as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. So if we look at the first type of conifer here, the true firs, the ABs. Now, these are a pretty versatile group. We can get all kinds of different colors, different growth habits. But if we pick out a couple, we'll show you here as we go. So Cis is a great little dwarf one. You can see that picture there, all the growing information you need. That's a really easy go-to little dark green conifer that looks like a little shrub. This is one of our best-selling ones here at the nursery. We go through quite a bit of these a year. It's got nice soft texture, a really easy one to grow. As long as I've got good sun and good drainage, I'm going to have a happy fir. Now, icebreaker will be a little bit more on the foliage style. So same idea, something very slow growing, just an inch or two a year, but I'm going to have that flocked Christmas tree look. So I'm going to have something that's got a twisted needle with a little silver in it, and certainly a really nice showpiece if you like some fun colors. This would be one that would pop in the landscape with all the greens and the different colors we already have in our yard. So icebreaker, another great little Korean fir. This is one I had in my yard for a long time. We see some of these around, but if you like yellow, I love yellow. This is a great variety of Nordman or Caucasian fir. This is one that will spread a little bit more, goes a little wider, and then gets a little gumdrop kind of shape to it. Very not the fastest growing thing in the world, a little bit faster than some of the super dwarf plants. But if you like yellow, this is one that will glow in the landscape. This is also one I probably would give a little bit more shade to. This is one we could have ideally in morning sun. A little protection from the hot afternoon sun will keep the color a little crisper. Sometimes like this year on a hot summer, we might get just a little bit of needle burn on a yellow type fir like this. This is one I have in front of my house. I love the blues, again, to mix with different colors in our landscape. Noble fir is one of our Christmas options. We don't need a 60, 70 foot tree down the road that gets giant. Let's look for something a little different. So the prostrate noble fir, you can see, is just going to creep along the ground. I have it in my rockery. It's one that's really fun with the color. It's a little softer texture again. I like, the color of blue spruce a little bit, but the fir maybe a little less insect prone and a little softer texture in the yard. So this is one, maybe we get a little leader once in a while, we can snip it out. Mine's about 20 years old. I think I've only pruned 3 or 4 over the years out of mine. But I'm going to have a very flat kind of spreading shape if you want something fun for hot sun. Then we've got Japanese style fir, or vetch fir. We always get a couple of these around. I just think it's a fun type of fir if you like all the different colors. This is one that won't get super huge, maybe 4 feet tall, 5, 6 feet wide. But I'm going to see green. I'm going to see some yellow. I'm going to see some blue. It's got a very interesting color and texture to it. And certainly an easy one to grow again, as long as we've got adequate sun and we've got good drainage again with the firs. Now, if we look at it, a different plant, this is what we call plum yew or cephalotaxis. We won't make you learn Latin today, but you can see on the list there some of these listed out for you. This would be a great columnar option. I'm kind of looking for that fat cigar look that grows up a little bit on the narrow side that won't take up a lot of spread, but I'd like a little bit of height. It's not a super big plant, but you're going to see that nice fastigiate growth habit. This is one we've used in a pot for a while if you like. It'd be a great little focal point in the garden. These will do pretty much full sun to part shade. I wouldn't go deep dark shade, but you can put these in a part shade situation too, and they'll do very, very well. Keep in mind the yews always get a berry on them. The plum yew is much larger. So if you've seen these in older plant around, you know what I mean. It almost looks like a small edible plum, but they are most inedible. So do not eat the berries on the cephalotaxis. If we have the same plant, instead of going up, I'd like something that kind of eats up some ground and goes side to side. Maybe we try one called Hedgehog. That's got a great name. This is one that Isley introduced a few years ago. A very useful plant. I can clip it if I want, make a little low hedge or border. I can do this, and again, the part shade, the sun, using it a few different areas. But the big thing with both of these cephalotaxis, much bigger needle. I think if you saw these around, you would almost think a little bit of tropical look to them. They've got a much larger needle than typical yews or other common things we see up here. Now, one of my favorite groups, I probably should count how many different Hinokis I have around my yard, a lot of fun dwarf ones, but this is one of my favorite groups of conifers. Hinoki cypress, very drought tolerant, very sun tolerant. There's a couple lighter colored ones we can do in a little bit of shade as well, but very easy to grow as long as we don't water them too much, and we don't have bad drainage in the winter months. So every option from little tiny, we call them moss on a rock that hardly even grow, each year an inch or two, yellows, greens, there's white tipped ones. And we can go all the way up to, probably again, one of our best selling trees is slender Hinoki cypress that would end up getting 15 or 20 feet tall, but only 4, 5, 6 feet across at the base. So a nice little, again, narrow focal point. But if you like the colors as we scroll through, go back and visit the slideshow here that's recorded, because you'll see lots of fun varieties of these. This isn't even the tip of the iceberg. We probably get 20 different Hinokis in on a typical season here at Sunnyside. So Butterball's a great little dwarf yellow one that doesn't get very big, very slow growing. We've got Fern Leaf, gives you that ferny texture, a little bit more upright. That's a really popular choice for a lot of landscapes, and also even a good sunny container that makes a fun little thriller for a container. Mauritii would give me some white, that's a nice bushy one with a little gumdrop point to it. That's one we could have in a little bit more shade, to be honest. That's one we could plant in that morning sun, afternoon shade situation. We've got one of my favorites, again, loving yellow. I love Melody. That's a great yellow one for that morning sun to shade location. If I looked at the foliage of that, I'm going to see a lot of blue with the green and the yellow again. Really nice color as that plant goes through the growing season. And that's not a super big one. That's a really manageable little small tree. Melody is a great yellow one. We've got some dwarfs like Golden Dwarf, the old Mandalutia. I see old ones in the landscape, been there for half a century, maybe as big as me, but typically in yards, you see these more like maybe in the 4 foot tall range with, again, that nice little soft kind of gumdrop shape to them. This is one that'll take, again, some good sun. We have good drainage. We don't water much. Lutea is a great choice if you like a little splash of yellow. Sunny Swirl, is one that'll give me a little bit yellow and probably a little bit more texture. If you like something fun, if you haven't seen these, we always have a few around. This is a plant that will, obviously give me yellow from the picture, but I'm going to have an interesting kind of twisted branch. This is one that'll create a little more interest with texture and things if you like something fun. Like I said, we always have a few. We got a couple of these around right now, but that's certainly a fun one if I've got, again, a hot, dry spot. Now, if we look at some of the Saguaro or thread type cypresses, this is a great little kind of bluish cast one called Cumulus. Looks like a little blue cloud. This is one for me I got as a sample of about 20 years ago. I've never touched mine with pruners, and you're looking about a plant that's about 1 foot tall and 2 feet across. Doesn't grow very fast. And this is, again, a really short one, just an inch or two a year. And as long as I don't water too much, that's one that'll fend for himself in the typical years here in Western Washington. I've also got a curly tops in my backyard, again, for the blue. Boulevard Cypress was the old cypress that looked like this, but it got super huge. I think a lot of brown in the center. We haven't really sold Boulevard Cypress for a number of years. We carry this dwarf one, which is much more manageable in size. And I haven't had the browning issues on it. So mine looks just like that in the garden after about 20 years. Might be up just a little taller than me, 6 or 7 feet tall, but nice compact shape and a great blue color, especially over the winter months. And then pincushion cypress. If I want something low that kind of spreads out into a little pincushion, golden pincushion will give me those flecks of bright yellow with the green, again, on something that's very drought tolerant that I don't have to water much. Now, if we look at a few Japanese cedars, these are cryptomerias is what we call these, and you'll see a number of different options around. I think this is one of the more fun conifers for our climate. It offers some nice green color. There's some other variegated ones as well, but this one to me is about the texture. You know, the branches look totally different than any other thing we would sell here. These almost are like rope-like. So you can see some tall ones, some dwarf ones again. The one thing to keep in mind with Cryptomeria is a lot of these will turn color in the winter, which again, to me, adds more interest. Some will turn purplish or bronzish. Other ones will just stay green if you're not into winter color. So picking the right variety of Cryptomeria for the size, and then always consider that the color will not in the winter. Then you get one that you'll like in your yard for a long time. So this is the snake Japanese cedar, Eru Keroides. This kind of looks a little like monkey puzzle tree, if you've seen giant ones of those around from South America. But this one will get all kinds of long, ropey, twisty branches. It'll get to be a big plant down the road, but a really fun kind of texture plant. If you're into something a little different, these would certainly make a statement in the yard. If we look at, again, probably one of our best-selling Cryptomerias, Black Dragon. This one would not turn color in the winter. If anything, it turns a darker green versus a lighter green in the spring. This is a very manageable sized one again. You know, maybe long-term, you might see some of these in the 8-foot tall range, very prunable. You can keep that a little tidier as well if you do some pruning, but even let go, like in the garden or down at Isley, that's got a beautiful shape and some fun character to it. We look at, this is one I have on my bank from my Japanese cedar. I love Golden Promise. This is one more globe shaped, a little bit more dwarf. This one would have a lot of yellow on it, especially in the fall, not in the spring as much that you would think. But right now I've got a really nice frosting of yellow on top of my little ropelet needles, and I keep that nice, dense, compact shape. This is one I could prune if I wanted to, but it's never going to get much bigger than say 4 feet by 4 feet. That's another very manageable sized one for a dwarf. And then Little Champion, that's kind of the green version. If we want an interesting texture, little nice shrubby conifer, nice green color but through all the seasons. This one just a little bit bigger at maybe 6 by 6, but it make a magnificent shrub specimen if you like something kind of fun. Then some tall ones, you know, we've got Rensden's Jade. We'll have these in spring again. That's a big, tall type Japanese cedar. If I want a big focal point, you know, 25-foot tree that I could use as a specimen in the background, that one will turn more purplish color in the winter. So you may have seen these driving around or something close to it, but this one I would get a purplish burgundy winter color too. Or if we want to stay with the greens and a nice touch of yellow, we would get the old second, or some people call this second Suji. This would be the yellow version of the tall Japanese cedar up there 25 feet down the road. Now, if we do a little bit of other cypresses, you know, Cypressus is our true cypress genus, and Monterey Cypress is one, I think, partly with global warming, they were always right on the harder line here, but a hardiness line here. But I wouldn't worry about losing Monterey Cypress much anymore. I've got a couple in my garden and actually in the ground. Wilma is one we could use as a garden specimen, but mainly folks grab this for containers. Beautiful lime yellow, narrow focal point conifer, great in the ground, or in pots, pretty slow growing. I don't know that it would ever get quite 12 feet tall here in Western Washington, but certainly with age, it would get a little bit of height to it. This is one, the only thing I'd say to be careful of is watch the north wind. If we have some of these Cypressus exposed to the north and we get those real cold, wet, cold, dry winds in the winter, sometimes we might get a little bit of browning on one side. So this is one I turn half a turn each year if you've got in a container in your OCD, or you just want to watch where you plant it in the garden and just make sure we're not exposed to the north. And we've got a hedge or another garden off to the side there that'll keep the wind from coming in. Awesome junipers. Excuse me. Now, junipers, I usually say that word, and we have a flashback to 1975 or 1985, and you go, I don't ever want to see a juniper again. These are not the old juniper tams that we had rats' nests in our front gardens for all those years. There's much better junipers out there, and I think juniper has a place in the landscape. It is probably the most drought tolerant conifer that we could add. For one, take all kinds of heat and they're super cold hardy. So this should be a plant that I think more people would use if you just choose the right juniper. So if I want to get something upright, a focal point nice and narrow, look at something simple like Compressa. That's what we call pencil point juniper. Super narrow, great at groupings even, or as a single specimen. But I could have all the hot to dry in the world, and that's going to thrive in a location like that. That's a really easy one to do. If we go for ground covers, you know, things that'll eat up some space in hot, dry areas, a sunny bank, a parking strip, the landscape border, where again, I don't want to water much. I want to keep weeds down and I want something green and colorful that'll eat up some area. You know, if you've got good drainage, juniper is still a great choice. We don't need 3 or 4 feet. We just needed something under a foot. So we have things like shore juniper. This is one called all gold. It would be beautiful lime to yellow color all through the growing season. That's one of the more popular ones around here. If we look at a deciduous plant, you remember me at the beginning, we kind of said, well, not all conifers are evergreen. We've got some of them we would classify as deciduous. Larch is the most common one. If I have larch growing, I've got a needle. It's a beautiful soft texture all through the growing season. But we get to this time of year and I'm turning orangey gold to drop my needles for the winter, and then I'll see you again next spring kind of thing. So I don't think there's much prettier plant in the spring when it's breaking bud than larch. It's a beautiful pea green. It's super soft, a really pretty plant in the yard when it re-needles out come springtime. But this time of year, we would be turning gold. Now we have all kinds of larch, big, tall, humongous tree options. This is the weeping one where you could kind of play with the form and the texture and kind of train it out how you want it in your yard. Weeping plants are always kind of up to you as far as what you want to do with it. And we have some shrubby ones. You know, this is a Japanese larch called Volterdingen, kind of a German Japanese larch, let's call it. But there's some shrubby options too. We get Romberg Parkin is one from back east that we stock here as well. If I don't want a tree, I don't want something weeping, I just want a nice larch for the gold fall color and the pretty needles during the growing season, we pick a shrubby one, you know, and put it in the right spot, and we've got a nice plant as well. Now here's one we maybe don't see quite as much around, Serbian Cypress. We call it Russian Juniper. It's got all kinds of fun names, but microbiota is probably the hardiest plant here on the property for one. This is a plant that will grow up in those areas. So you can guess down there, you know, 30 below zero for hardiness. It looks kind of like a juniper and a cypress a little bit too, but it kind of grows as a ground eater. You know, it's gonna fill up some room. It's nice and green. The big thing with this one is what we don't call it brown, we call it chocolate. So it turns like a milk chocolate color in the wintertime, which is actually really nice in the landscape. We've had a lot of people that try these pretty indestructible plant that have ended up liking that color contrast over the winter. They're not dying. They'll be back to green in spring again, but it is kind of a milky chocolate color. It doesn't look like a dead brown. It looks like a nice alive brown. How's that? Now, if we do a few spruce here, I'm gonna have to get moving here. I'm running out of time. If we do a couple spruce here, there's all kinds of ones we stock here at Sunnyside, but you'll see quite a few options here as we go through some pictures. I tried to pick out maybe a nice variation of some different ones. Push is a variety of Norway spruce, and you can see from those pictures, this is one that will have red new needles or new little cones every spring, and a very attractive cone on the tip of the branch this time of year. Really cool plant. We go through quite a bit of these here at the nursery for something, again, that's very small. This is a truly dwarf one that I'm going to have a little shrub look, maybe 2 feet tall, 3 feet wide long term, that will take the heat and give me a really cool color. When those things bud out with the red new needles come springtime, they're really striking in the yard. If we look at Inglewood Spruce, you know, say I want to get into some blue, this is another super hardy variety that would go down there in that 30 below zero range that we would find up in northern Alberta and some of the colder areas of northern Canada. This is one that would grow as a shrub again. I don't need a tree. I want that blue spruce texture on a very manageable sized plant. You know, the Inglewood Spruce, the Jasper variety here, might be about 3 feet by 3 feet, and that's it. You know, I'm going to have the cool color I want, that spruce texture, but on a much more manageable plant. If we look at some Serbian spruces, you know, these are some of my favorite. Personally, for me, I like the one color on top, the other color on the bottom. This is one you'll see some green, some blue, some silver, and you can pick a size. There's all kinds of Serbians, from little dwarf shrub ones to manageable size trees like this Deriders, or we go full size, and get a 25, 35 foot grower. The big thing with Serbians is they never tend to have a huge spread. So this is a plant, if I see an old Serbian spruce, I've got that beautiful narrow focal point with a little skirt on the bottom that's not going to take over my whole yard. So very manageable for spread as well. The reason I put deriders on there is because, again, it's not so formal maybe as some of the other ones look a little like Christmas trees. This is one kind of has an alpine feel to it. A little bit of regular growing, still have a nice tree shape, but maybe a little bit more texture and a little more fun. There would be a full size one. If we look at one like silver blue is one we typically carry around here, that I would have that perfect big evergreen shape too. Now, if we look at some Oriental spruce, typically these are big trees. Isley was kind enough a number of years ago to start introducing some manageable size ones. So if you like something fun, Oriental spruce is a little shorter needle, a little tighter growing, but we've got a beautiful yellow one we always carry around here called Firefly. That's a very manageable conifer. If I've got good hot sun, good drainage, I can site that in my yard and not have a massive tree down the road. Now, if we look at a few blue spruce, again, you want that powder blue color, super hardy. These we can grow pretty much anywhere, but I've got some options again. Do I want low, a shrub, a tree? There's all kinds of good blue spruce out there. This is another great example of a plant. To me, you're going to pay for what you get. We could order in Colorado blue spruce and they're very little blue and mostly green. If I want a blue spruce, I want blue. So I'm going to pay extra for a named grafted variety that's going to give me exactly the color I want. So pay the money for a good blue spruce and you'll be a happy gardener. We have ones like Procumbens. This would one again, kind of like that creeping noble fir. These are the two plants I chose between years ago, but I've got that prostrate spreading habit, almost looks like a ground cover with that beautiful blue color on it. So again, hot sun and dry, that's a great choice to eat up some room. We've got Cedars. This is one of our most popular selling blue spruces because it's a great dwarf, super dense, nice Christmas tree shape to it, great blue color, but I'm never going to get 20, 30, 40 feet tall like species blue spruce would get. This is going to be much more manageable for the home gardener. I have the blue I want, the tree I want, but I don't have to worry about the pruning and the size down the road. We've got weeping options. We always carry the blues here. If I wanted something fun again that I can train, I've said this once before, I'll say it again now with weeping. This is a type of plant we don't really put a height or a spread on because it's really up to you. What do you want to do with your weeping plant? I could stake that up and get tall and let it fall down a little more narrow. I can crook it over and let it turn into a weeping kind of pendulous shrub. This is really up to you on what you want to do with weeping plants like the blues. Now there's the holy grail for the conifer lovers right there. We always have to put a picture of the old chief in our show. Chief Joseph is a spectacular variety of lodgepole pine. So this is a plant more native to the east of the mountains in eastern Washington, eastern Oregon. But this is a green pine tree. If you saw this in June, you'd be like, yeah, just another green pine tree. This time of year, that's the color I have. So Chief Joseph, for yellow lovers and for collectors, is about the coolest pine there is. This is one that grows pretty slow, not super huge, but it is gold as gold can be through the winter, green as green can be through the summer. So a very interesting variety of pine that will always turn gold when we start to get cold in the fall. They tend to be a little spendy, I'll warn you, because they're hard to graft. They're easy to grow, but hard to graft. So the next one here, I don't want to disrespect the Mugo, but sometimes we call this the poor man's. I would raise my hand for that too. The poor man's Chief Joseph pine. If we want the yellow, the same idea on a very reasonable price plant, look for the golden Mugos. We have a lot of these in right now. This would be, again, more green, spring, summer, fall. Now that we've gotten a little cold weather, it is glowing yellow in the yard for the entire winter time. So this is one we could keep as a shrub, manageable size. but certainly one to consider if you like the yellow. Now, if we want to go narrow, we could look at something like the Austrian pine called Comet. We get some big ones of these around here every year. You can see this perfect fastigiate columnar form. This is one I'll get some nice height out of, maybe 15, maybe 20 feet on a really old tree, but I'm not going to eat up my yard side to side. So very narrow and upright. I like the Austrians because they have those big, long, bright candles. So in the wintertime, that's going to have nice contrast with that darker green old growth. Very pretty pine. And we look at some Japanese types of white pines. Now, the biggest thing with Pinus, all these will be Pinus parviflora. I have a couple in my yard. They're spectacular plants for color, for structure. They've got great texture, and most of them aren't super huge, but be really careful with the drainage. I've said this probably 20 times already, but this is the one probably more so than any of the ones we've talked about yet. I cannot have this plant too wet. This is one we tend to overwater even at the nursery here and lose some of them during the growing season. If you've got hot, dry, really well-drained sandy soil, Pinus parvifloras are a great choice for you. This is not one I'm going to pop above heavy clay or with the sprinkler system that's going to get overwatered, because it will crash pretty quickly. So if you look at some colors here, Goldilocks is going to give me some nice yellow. So I want green base color with yellow new needles. You know, again, pretty manageable size plant at about maybe 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide. If we look at Eastern white pine, now this is a different creature, same idea. We want hot, we want dry. This is, again, big, huge 50-foot tree. There's weeping Eastern white pines, or we have shrubby ones. I think mini twist is a really fun plant. It's going to be manageable in size, you know, maybe 6 by 6 or so as a shrub, or a little short gumdrop shaped tree. But this is one I'm going to have the contorted needles with the green and the silver. So that's going to give me some nice color and some fun texture for a pine. If we're going to do the weeping variety, I love Niagara Falls. You know, regular weeping white pine gets awful big. Niagara Falls is the clone that's going to be a little more manageable and a little flatter for home gardeners. So if you've got a sunny rockery, a landscape bed, you want to have something fun that kind of flows along the ground, Eastern white pine would be a great choice for you. And we've got the smallest of small. You know, here's the miniature version of Eastern white pine called sea urchin. This is a perfect little silvery green sea urchin. It's exactly what it looks like. So this is one maybe 2 feet by 2 feet if you want something a little bit smaller. And we've got black pines. You know, this is one, again, you can see the color of those candles with that deep green, long needle, and then the real bright white, chalky white new candles, again, offers really nice contrast. We typically will stock this variety, Thunderhead, because it's a little bit more manageable. We're not going to turn into a massive tree down the road, but again, kind of that big, large, dome-shaped tree, maybe 12 or 15 feet tall and wide, very prunable. This is one a lot of folks will nip candles here and there and do a really fun shape, or even cloud prune type of deal. Now, if we go through the next one is Podocarpus here. This is we call mountain yew, plum pine. It's got a bunch of different names, but this is, again, towards the top of the drought tolerant list. If we were to go find these native, typically more in the southern hemisphere down in New Zealand, but if we found these, they would be in real sandy, rocky, high alpine soil, don't get much water, take some cold a little bit, but certainly a manageable plant. I think they're a fun texture plant for the landscape. There's some really cool varieties of this one come out now. Mountain gem or blue gem, a variety of the Podocarpus, will give me a nice little kind of steely blue color. I can prune it if I want, shear it and keep it formal, let it get a little bit more regular if you like some texture. But again, not a super big plant, very manageable in size. Or we have something like red tip, you know, same idea, little bit smaller growth habit on this one, but I'll have a really nice red new needle on that. That's going to have kind of a green base color with a brighter red tip on it. Another great choice. Now, if we look at some Cyadopetus, we won't make you spell that because I don't know if I could spell it very easily either, but we call these Japanese umbrella pines. I think these are, again, another really fun evergreen more and more people are discovering that shop here at Sunnyside. We carry some pretty cool varieties of these. I'm really low right now. We've got a few around, but we will have a really nice selection again coming out of winter. You know, I don't have to get plain old Japanese umbrella pine anymore. Something that got pretty tall. We can go tall and narrow now, or there's some fabulous varieties that'll have that perfect little shape of a tree, but on a miniature sized tree. So we always have in, they call this Grün Krugel or green bullet. Looks like a perfect little dense green tree. We get a number of different varieties these in. You can come down and take a look, or look at Isley's website here. We'll give you a few options as well. But a really fun tree. You know, if you're looking for something different, this isn't something you'll find in most every yard. Again, looks a little tropical to me. Longer needle, a little bit more tropical looking, but a nice, easy green that we can do it again in that sun, or this one definitely will be okay in part shade as well. There's our tall, narrow one called Joe Cozy. Great little focal point with the fun needles on that. Now, if we look at a few yews, you know, English yews, Irish yews, we get all kinds of different yews in here. But this will kind of give you a little taste. You know, yews are some plants that I would consider maybe for a little bit more shade. They can still handle the sun, but they can take a little bit more shade. Again, as long as I've got moist, well-drained soil, this one I would not call on the drought tolerant side, something that will need to water a little bit during the summer months, not a huge amount, but a little bit. But if you look at the options, I think you'll see yews a pretty useful plant, you know, around the garden in containers and landscapes. This is the one I have in my huge pots on my patio for about 10 years now. I wanted a big column plant. I love the yellow again, so I went for the silver spire. It's got a really nice yellow new needle, keeps a nice formal appearance, and I can plant flowers around it. Certainly great in the landscape as well. Maybe you want something besides arborvitae and you can plant a little hedge of yews as kind of a nice little border, again taking a little bit more shade. We want a little bushy one, you know, we can get all kinds of little dwarfish yews that I can prune more into shrubs. Dwarf bright gold's one I have out in the front garden that's always got a lot of yellow. This is one I would dare say is so yellow in spring you got to put your sunglasses on because it is really bright when we get the yellow new flush out in the springtime. And we have even smaller, a Japanese style yew, Nana arrescens. This is again one of our best-selling conifers here at the nursery. Very slow growing, nice and low, spreads a little bit. This is one would make a very manageable size plant. Will grow a little bit side to side, but takes pruning very well if you like the yellow. Now we get into some arborvitaes, you know, and it doesn't need to be our emerald green little soldiers or great fence material or hedging to substitute for fence. But we can find some other really fun ones like golden tuffet. You know, this is one, it's got a nice texture, stays nice and low. You can see the color, not just green. I'm going to have almost a little orangey color to that over the winter months. And we've got things with yellow, you know, once again, we've got so much green around here in our yards naturally. If you're going to get an arborvitae, get a yellow one, you know, pop some color on that thing. It doesn't need to just be more green. We can also get a good yellow variety like Jantar. You know, that's got a great narrow upright shape, but I'd have a beautiful yellow cast on that plant. Or we get something fun, you know, like Oriental Arborvitae, Frankie Boy. It's got all kinds of funky thread branch needles on it. If we don't prune that, it kind of gets a little wild haircut looking to it, but certainly a little bit of yellow again, and a real fun plant. You know, if you're into something a little bit different, Frankie Boy will give that to you. That's got some fun needles on it. Then we've got Western Red Cedar. You know, we got Western Red Cedars here that grow 40 feet tall. But this is one I would say, again, if you struggle maybe with a little more wet, or maybe I've got a little bit of clay and I just can't seem to get it all broken out of the yard. You know, this is one being a native to Western Washington that we're a little bit easier on some of the heavier soils, a little bit wetter winter, not going to bother the Western Red Cedar quite as much. So this is a variety of dwarf Western Red Cedar, Grün Krugel. This is one that would stay low and bushy, turns a really nice bronzy color in the wintertime, just like our native Western Red Cedars do. But this would be a good landscape choice. I don't want a giant tree. I love the texture of that plant, the smell of it, the color of it, but I just want a shrub. Look for one like Grunkrugel. We go through quite a few of these as well. We've got some hemlocks as we're getting towards the end here. Things like Cole's prostrate. You know, hemlock is another native plant around here. We have Western hemlock, Canadian hemlocks not too far north of us, just across the border. But these are perfect Western Washington trees. I mean, hemlock likes regular rain, likes a nice moist soil, needs some okay drainage, but certainly hemlocks are really useful. And this is one we could get towards the shady side of the garden. I've got a couple hemlocks that don't get any sun in my yard. And certainly this is one that if you had more shade to really consider some different options. We have something like Cole's prostrate, a weeping one that's going to stay real low and almost hang over a rockery. We've got a beautiful one here at the nursery property we could show you. I have this in my backyard, zero sun. It's underneath the big old deciduous azalea, and it just kind of grows like a ground cover because I wanted some evergreen in there. Again, I've got deciduous, leaves are gone. Now I've got a cool conifer that I can enjoy some color in the winter on as well. Moonfrost, another one I have in the back garden. If you wanted a lot of white, this is one that'll really brighten up a pretty good shady spot. I don't want you to think these can't take sun because they can take some sun too, but this is one I can have morning sun, a little bit of afternoon shade or total shade. And I'm going to have a really nice, easy white tip on green and something, again, I can prune and keep more like a shrub versus getting a leader and turning into a large tree. I like that color and I want the tree, we would look for something like summer snow. Now I've got a very manageable focal point. Bright white will glow in a shadier spot in the yard. I can prune this very easy, being a random conifer, but certainly something with some great color and manageable size. You know, maybe this, if I never pruned it, might get like 10 feet tall, 6 or 8 feet wide kind of size. That's a whole lot of conifers, and I can't believe I made it, Nicole. She's probably laughing at me back there. But that's a lot of conifers. Just a reminder, I'm going to stop the share here, but just a reminder, you know, we record this class. That's a lot of pictures. There's a lot of names on there, so you can always go back and if you don't want to, you don't have to watch me again that way, but you can click through the slideshow and maybe write down a couple names. You saw those slides I put up there. You know, I pillaged one of our grower sites for conifer information more than any. If you know of a nursery, it's called Isley Nursery, I-S-E-L-I. If you put that in your search engine, it's a wholesale only place. You can't buy plants from them, but their website's incredible for homeowners. You can go through, if you take my list, look at the genuses, you could click on Cumulus and look through 30 varieties of Hinoki cypress, for example, with great pictures, growing information with the growth rate and garden size, not this garbage 10-year, well, if I plant it, don't prune it. Well, yeah, in 10 years, it's bigger than you thought it was going to be. Because the one thing with conifers is that magical word dwarf. And everybody who comes in and looks for plants, I want a dwarf, I want a dwarf. And you say the word dwarf, I think your mind is picturing this little tiny, you know, 2 foot by 2 foot plant that I don't ever have to touch. Keep in mind, it's a really relative term, and it's not the dwarf. You may want miniature when it comes to conifer. And if you look at the growth rate, that to me is going to tell you everything. I plant this in there, it's growing 6 inches a year. Okay, that's a little quick for me. Let me see if I can find something that just grows a couple inches a year. Then we don't have the long-term maintenance, the pruning issues, and everything else down the road. Okay, so that's a lot of conifers. I'm going to mention a couple things, and we'll do some questions if Steve hasn't probably gotten them all so far. Tomorrow's class, I'll be in here on Sunday at 11 tomorrow. We're doing putting the garden to bed. So if you're kind of interested in learning how to get certain projects done, maybe get ahead on spring a little bit, and what to do to maybe protect certain tender plants, we'll be talking about that tomorrow at 11. Be sure to join us. In 2 weeks is our next class weekend. So the 6th and the 7th, we'll have a couple classes. We got houseplants with Holly. She's awesome here doing our houseplant classes. That will be available on Saturday. And on Sunday, I'm doing winter pruning. So if you're in the mood to get out and start doing some slicing and dicing on the trees and shrubs, we're going to attack the winter pruning subject starting here in November. Okay. So just as a reminder, with all the classes, you know, we've always got a great discount for our local loyal Sunnyside followers. Come down and shop. It's not raining too bad today. It's supposed to rain a little later. And tomorrow, I think, is going to rain a substantial amount. So today'd be better to come down. So if you come down, just tell them you were at Trevor's class here today. Our cashiers press a magic button. You got 20% off your conifer purchases, and that'll go all the way through next Friday. So yes, we're in Western Washington. Yes, it's going to rain, but there's going to be one day in there, I guarantee you, the sun's going to come out. You come down and do some shopping. We got a pretty good selection of conifers always this time of year. And then again, come spring, we do this class again pretty early in spring when we have another influx of inventory. But there's quite a bit down here to choose from right now. Okay. Well, I'm getting tired of talking, Nicole. Let's do some questions.
I'm only going to make you talk more, so sorry
Okay,
about that.
there you
But the good news is that Mr. Smith has been incredibly helpful on the backside here, and he is taking care of most of the questions. So I only have a few for you. Unless you guys have more, please feel free to throw them up in the Q&A little chat, and we'll grab those and have Trevor answer them live for us. Speaking of product and when things come in, somebody asked, when do we usually get larches? What time of year do we see those?
You know, that one's not to sound vague, a little bit in the fall, a little bit more in the spring. Right now, we do have some shrubby larches in inventory still that are starting to turn gold. If you want weeping ones, they're not quite digging yet. I would guess just maybe a month at the most, we will start to get that stuff in late November. We would have weeping larches in again. And then spring, we'd have more of the shrubs in as well. It's a little bit of fall, a little bit of spring. Some of that time it's just grower availability. Those are sometimes not the easiest ones to find.
Gotcha. And reaching out is always a good thing, right? You know, if you're looking for something specific, send us an email, and Trevor will keep a little note to make sure that, you know, he keeps his eyes open for if you're looking for something specific. So, so we use conifer and evergreen, those words a lot. Can you talk a little bit more? I know you kind of touched on it, but are they the same thing? Are they different?
You know, this is a tough one because they are kind of the same thing, but they're not. I mean, a conifer is a conifer. It is always going to produce a cone. So there's a lot of evergreen plants around, but to me, you got to break that into two. We would have coniferous evergreens or cone-bearing plants, and we would have broad-leafed evergreens. So we talked a little bit about that in our last class, Winter Interest. I've got evergreen, but I've got a leaf. I don't have a needle, and that's not going to produce a cone. So if you think maybe that might help a little bit, you know, conifer is always going to produce a cone. That's how it reproduces itself, by seed. They call them the gymnosperms, not to turn this into a science lesson, but that's what it is. And evergreens aren't necessarily one of those, all conifers are conifers, but not all evergreens are conifers. How's that for confusion?
As clear as mud. No,
There you go.
yeah. So somebody who's over on the eastern side of Washington asked if it's too late to plant a mini conifer or a dwarf one in a container.
I don't know where you're at in Eastern Washington. I don't think any of us have gotten much winter yet. If it's a hardy one, certainly in the containers are going to be fine. Over there, make sure it's a super thick frost-proof container so we don't have to crack the pot in the winter. But you can plant year-round. I mean, we had a place in Clallam over across the mountains for years. You know, if you can get it in before the ground's frozen, awesome. You're ready to go for the next year. Otherwise, we do this and kind of when the ground thaws come springtime. But in a container, absolutely. You know, go ahead and pop it in there. Just watch the weather. I don't know where you're at in Eastern Washington, but if you see the polar vortex drop down here and sometime in the winter, and all of a sudden you're used to, you know, 0 or a couple degrees below 0, and now you're at 20 below, maybe take that pot and shove it in the garage for a couple nights kind of thing.
So I was just going to ask that, do you have to do anything special, whether it's a new conifer in a container or it's one that's been there for a while? Do you have to do anything to those containers over the winter?
I wouldn't worry about it myself. The issue in containers is not going to be the cold. It's going to be desiccation. So I can't have cold and dry. So that's why don't put that pot up underneath the eave and let it sit there all winter. As it gets dry and we freeze, now we got issues. As long as I've got moisture in that soil to develop the ice and protect the root system, we'll be fine.
Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like we got everything, which is pretty exciting. And before 11 o'clock, we don't usually do that. So that's pretty cool.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, right. But if for some reason something comes up, as always, we're always here 7 days a week. We're open. We're happy to answer any questions. You know, if you've got specific things going in your yard, send us some pictures with some details. We're happy to try and identify what's going on and what the solution is. If you're looking for something specific, hit us up. We're happy to try and keep our eyes open for what you're looking for. We're really appreciative that you joined us today. We'll hope that we'll see you back again tomorrow and then the next weekend. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Happy Halloween here next weekend too.